All right. Hey, welcome back to another another episode of the podcast, Growing Up in America. Our guest today is Larry James. Larry is the CEO Emeritus of CitySquare, a great organization in Dallas, Texas. Larry, how does it feel, by the way, to be emeritus rather than sort of the guy in charge?
It's a great relief. I'm taking as full advantage of it as I can as it begins. It's great. I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to stay engaged, but to be able to have a little more choice about where my engagement starts and where it ends.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today. And
glad to be.
Yeah, visiting with us. Larry, one of the things that you and I have often talked about is poverty in America. And do you see any, obviously we make sort of little strides, little steps forward, and then we seem to make huge steps back every once in a while. Do you see hope as you move forward in terms of ending poverty in America?
Yes. And it's a twofold answer. One, it is possible. The recent investment in our people as a result of the pandemic has demonstrated we can drive those numbers down, and we can drive those numbers down quickly. It's a matter of will and sound policy, because the benefit of driving investments deep in a community is that the resultant economic impact for the good goes deeper and is more sustainable as people have an opportunity to do their thing, so to speak, and to contribute to the stability and the growth and the harmony of the community. And the second thing that makes me optimistic is the next generations, the ones who are coming behind us, are not going to tolerate this foolishness much longer. And one of the reasons why we've had this insurrectionist sort of mentality on the far right is there's several factors, but one factor I believe is that the right sees what's coming in terms of this next generation of people, including my daughters and my grandchildren. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic because of those two factors.
Yet, I would have said, 20 years ago, we might have been optimistic. And yeah, you and I have been talking about poverty, year after year. And but it does seem, though, like in the last 5 years, towards the end of the Obama administration, more people started talking about ending poverty as sort of a public discourse. Is that, obviously to talk about something makes a big difference, but how long is it going to take before we do have this political will, do you think?
That's a great question. There's such a reaction against the obvious success of these investments. But it could be quicker. It could be achieved more quickly than either one of us realize, because, we just haven't seen it much. Johnson drove poverty down 19% in about 18 months, and he would have done more had it not been for the Vietnam War, which was his Achilles heel. Yeah. There always seems to be a damn war that gets involved and messes everything up. We're seeing that again now. But we can have effect, and we can do better than we've been doing. And the fact that we're talking about it the way we're talking about it is also, I think, indicative of a difference. There's a difference here. And the next generation understands fairness and the importance of applying intelligence to problems and not stopping, not giving up. I think our role was probably just to keep the thumb in the dike. And hopefully, while we had it there, we were trying to teach some principles that made sense, both to the community and to the larger nation. And so I think we're reaping the benefit of some of that hard work. And you're certainly one of the guys who's done that.
Yeah. When you think about your work at CitySquare, obviously growing awareness is part of the solution. But like you said, fingers in the dike. But more than that, CitySquare has sort of been the singular group in Dallas that has really done tremendous work sort of in the fight against poverty, but also trying to sort of keep it at bay.
Well, that's kind of you to say that. I think one of the key factors in whatever we've achieved has really been simple friendship. This morning, I had a tour, a couple of really friendly bankers came by to see how their investments were being used and held out the prospect of maybe some more investment. And it just so happened that I had an encounter just before they arrived for this tour. I had an encounter with a guy that I've known for 25 years who has made phenomenal progress in his own life from a junkie dealer on the streets of East Dallas 30 years ago to a guy whose life is plagued by physical illness, but whose heart is full of optimism. And the key thing there is, we've come to know each other as friends and we love each other. And you can't do that at scale unless everybody just does what they can with one or two people. And so you achieve scale by driving that value proposition deep in the culture of your organization. And, that's what's kept me going. I can read and conceptualize theoretically, but what really gets me is the friendships of people who have personal stories that have been transformed.
Oftentimes when we talk to public officials, they talk about the fact that maybe churches should sort of take care of, the poor and those families that don't have what a lot of other people have. And your background, you come from a Christian background. You're, a pastor. Talk about, what do you say to people that talk about this idea of sort of the church sort of being sort of the responsible, holding the responsibility for helping people out?
Oh, that's a loaded one there, isn't it? I'm not overly optimistic that the faith communities of the United States are going to rise up and call the poor blessed and do things that really cost them something. And of course, there is the small fact that, the annual budget, as I understand it from HUD, accounts for more than the total holdings of all the wealth of all the churches in the country just from 1 year.
Wow.
We're talking about something that's not possible. And that's not to say, we can be totally positive about the church. I was a working pastor for a long time.
Yeah.
And the church, I'm a churchman, I think, of some sort. But there's just not the capacity there that people who make those kinds of statements don't understand the limitations. I was just in a call this morning with a guy who had some plans about developing some church property that was going to be sold or abandoned or whatever. Churches, mainline churches especially, are losing members at such a clip that they're not going to survive into the next generation or century as they have been in the past. There's not enough money to keep the places up, and there's no reason to have such gigantic places in the first place, given the decline of the mainline church. So what could we do if we repurposed those properties and made them fitting for people as new homes or farms or whatever, but something more productive that could be channeled toward the poor? But that's not the kind of scale that solves the problem you're talking about. There's a role for the church. I don't want the church to go away. There's a role there, but maybe the main role is to become informed about what poverty really is.
As we talk about fighting poverty in the church, right, we have seen as a role in history, right, as an example, the Catholic Church in South America really have a role in sort of fighting poverty and fighting autocracy and sort of changing things. The current Pope was engaged on both sides of that at one point, right? And I wonder today in America, we see the evangelical church sort of taking the opposite role, right, in terms of the idea of fighting poverty. What do you say around that? Because it's sort of an unusual thing that maybe you and I wouldn't have expected 10 years ago.
Yeah. So, I lost my faith in seminary. When I went to Baptist seminary, the faith that I had been the faith I had received, I learned was not really the faith that was reasonable given just the nature of the text of Scripture. And that's another story as well. But I rediscovered my faith and reshaped my faith by reading the works of people like Gustavo Gutierrez and other James Cone and others who were liberationists and who found in Scripture this grand theme of liberation And it was not just the pie in the sky by and by. It wasn't just a transactional save your soul, right wing evangelical theology. It was actually a way to reform and transform and reform the entire world based on principles of justice and equity and love. And so that's the Jesus I've bought into. And that's the Jesus who continues to prod those of us in mainline churches to really not lose sight of who this guy was. You know, someone said, I got a little poster last week from a Disciples of Christ minister who's had a great tenure here in Dallas, and it said something like, hate all the liberals in the country during the week and worship a liberal on Sunday. That's kind of, there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, I'm working on a book concept right now that basically gets at the notion of how offensive Jesus really was. I mean, he offended everybody because he was so counterintuitive and so challenging in terms of his value propositions as it relates to the poor and those who are marginalized on purpose. I heard the phrase last week, instead of food desert, someone chimed up and said, don't call it a food desert. We really should call it food apartheid. And it's not just the absence of food, it's the absence of food on purpose. That kind of thing will stir things and disrupt things. And there's got to be some of that as well. And so my conception of Jesus is that of a disruptive Messiah.
I love that idea of, you know, we could talk about housing apartheid and residential apartheid and childcare apartheid and public school apartheid. I mean, it's so striking when you look at the numbers, and I'm sometimes amazed. And you and I are super optimistic, right? But when I look at the data, I'm almost amazed at how you and I and, you know, all the people we work with in Texas can maintain this optimism when the data is so clearly pessimistic, you know. And I see the data and I'm still optimistic, right? But it's sort of I don't know, it's our very nature. Maybe we couldn't do the work that we do if we weren't optimistic, but it's
well,
so striking.
And I'm optimistic again because I see some possibilities on the horizon. We're not going to have this governor forever. We're not going to have these senators forever. I never write to Congress because my congressperson he agrees with everything I say. I mean, I write him a note every time and, you know, tell him I'm praying for him or thanks for your good work. But I mean, you know, Colin Allred doesn't need a letter from Larry James, or Eddie Bernice Johnson doesn't need a letter from Larry James, except maybe to thank them. But there's going to come a time when a new kind of leader is going to rise up, and these guys, and it's unbelievable to see some of the things that our governor's pulling, some of the causes he's supporting. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. A smart guy who's been apparently turned by politics that, you know, all in the hope of being elected. It's just reelected. You know, it's amazing what the yearn for power can do to people.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Larry, I'll ask you one more question, then I want to ask you a fun. And so when you look at families and children in Texas today, are there a few things that are happening policy-wise, you know, that you think, wow, we just, you know, that is the movement in the right direction? For me, I just see our movement in early education and I think, wow, that's the right thing. I mean, for you, what is that thing that you see going on that you're like, yeah, man, I'm happy that's going on?
Well, you mentioned one that's obvious, right? I am so super encouraged by the performance and leadership of certain superintendents across this state. There are some really rock star supers in Texas who go unnoticed for the most part. I've gotten to know our superintendent here in Dallas fairly well. And this guy is the real deal. I mean, it's never about him. It's always about the children. It's about the bus drivers and the lunchroom workers. It's about the parents and the households. This guy is so open to making a contribution of decency to humanity that he is just a stellar leader. And I don't know the others as well as I have known him by watching him, But I sense we're fortunate to have this kind of leadership. And from an educational standpoint, and I don't know a darn thing about education professionally, but just what I read, it looks like Dallas ISD and others are not being afraid to implement cutting edge, innovative changes to how kids learn.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's commonsensical. In other ways, it's based on a deep commitment to the importance of children in our communities. And so I'm encouraged by that and inspired, frankly, by Dr. Hinojosa's actions here in Dallas.
Yeah, Hinojosa is great. I think you're right? These activist superintendents that we have around the state, Houston's had them. We have a brand new one. We'll see what happens there. Dallas, the Valley, the Rio Grande Valley has a number of them that it's just amazing. The El Paso area. It's nice, right? That they're in areas, that you wouldn't expect great things, yet we're seeing some really wonderful things, which is really nice. That's an area of data that's sort of fun to look at, right? So it's good.
Absolutely.
We've gone through this pandemic. What has been the thing that you've been missing most, Larry, during the pandemic?
The ability to get out, whatever that means, to get out of the house with more freedom, to get on an airplane again with more freedom, to take a longer vacation, to have, my gosh, what we surrendered last holiday season was grim. And our family is not that large, but we missed having what we normally have. It's going to be good to get back to that if we can. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I've noticed, though, throughout this pandemic, and I was telling my banker friends this morning, I've noticed groups in Dallas, nonprofit organizations and service providers and others, putting down the competition and just picking up the mantle of cooperation. And that's been pretty cool to watch friends who, there's a bit of competition in this, I guess, because of the way the system is. But all that has dissipated for the sake of the larger good. It's been really refreshing.
There has been this rebirth amongst nonprofits all over in terms of collaboration, right? I feel like I've been rejuvenated, right? Because of everyone working together. It's
exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Really good. And then the final question, next time I'm up in Dallas, and if you take me to your favorite restaurant, where's it going to be?
Oh, wow. Desperados over on Greenville.
What sort of food does Desperados have?
Desperados is a classic Tex-Mex local restaurant. And it's just, it's got great fajitas and wonderful margaritas. And the owner's a guy named Jake, and he for years had a food stand at the state fair where he fried everything. And great guy. Yeah, I would say Desperados probably.
Anyone who has fried everything, yeah, I want to go there. That's
fried margaritas, fried margaritas.
It was that little battered thing. You freeze batter and fry them, and then
exactly.
I love that. I also want to congratulate you, Larry, because you're you are the winner this year of the Maconda O'Connor Brown Activism Legacy Activism Award, which goes to great activists all across the state. And you and as we both know, it's our teams, but congratulations to you and all those that you work with over the years to do so much for so many.
Well, I was surprised and astounded and thankful and honored by the selection. I know there are a lot of people doing a lot better job than I. You're right, though. The team is how we get things done here, and I'm just kind of the old man trying to stay out of the way. These young kids are amazing.
These young kids are amazing, aren't they?
They really are.
It's so nice. When we're at a dinner party or something, and people say all these millennials and these young people, I try to tell them, man, you get a good one. They're fantastic. They're doing some great work. So,
this past summer, we probably had 280 AmeriCorps members, and we have about 100 during the year that we place in other nonprofits. Man, I would match these kids up against anybody. They're really something else.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Larry, thank you very much for all that you do. Thanks for being on the Growing Up in America podcast. And I know I'll see you real soon, man.
Thanks a lot.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.